All right. Hey everyone, my name is Jeannie Jaworski, and I have had an opportunity to do a number of informational interviews with folks about different fields that might be appropriate for student affairs professionals to go into, and I have always been just absolutely amazed at the knowledge and the talent, as well as the willingness to share about their paths. And so I wanted to pull some experts together so that during these times where a lot of people are either expats due to COVID-19 or are thinking about becoming an expat on their own accord, they're just like these wonderful resources for you all. So thank you for being here. We are recording, and I'm going to let my fantastic panel, my nonprofit panel, introduce themselves, and I think this is one of the most looked forward to panels of the entire series. So thank you all for being here. If you want to introduce yourselves, tell us who you are, what you're currently up to these days, and also what your background in student affairs, higher education is, so folks can know where they may align with your backgrounds. That would be great. And I'm going to ask Tamika to get us started.
Awesome. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tamika Austin, pronouns she, her, and hers. And I currently serve as an admissions manager with CHECS Incorporated, which is an AmeriCorps program. Prior to working with CHECS, I did a lovely 2 years as a residence hall director before leaving higher education due to my experience. And so I left higher ed after 2 years. I do have experience in Dean of Students Office, multicultural affairs. And prior to coming to CHECS, I did also work as a Dean of Students in a charter school.
Wonderful, thank you. Candice.
Hello, everyone. Well, whatever time it is, good evening, midday, good morning, whatever. My name is Candice Clawson. I'm the director of the Center for Higher Education and Career Support. From now on, we will call this CHECS because it's way too many words, at the Harlem Children's Zone in New York City. Prior to my exit, I was a hall director. I feel like that's everyone's like battle story. Like, I started in best life. I was a hall director at Georgetown for 2 years right after college. While I was in grad school at Columbia, I worked at Barnard in housing, and then I was at the University of Virginia in housing for another 2 or 3 years after that. And then I transitioned to NYU and helped open the first domestic global program in Washington, D.C., and then transitioned to main campus NYU to serve as an assistant director in student life. And then at that point, I had had enough. And quite frankly, I had a moment where like there were just too many white woman tears in my office, and I was like, I can't do this anymore. And so I just happened to be looking on LinkedIn. I saw a position at a nonprofit called Prep for Prep, and I worked there for about 5 years. And I have just completed my first year at the Harlem Children's Zone. So I have a couple of different expat experiences. Yeah, I think that's all I need to say right this second. Hey, Emily.
Perfect. Thank you, Candice. Kaelie.
Hello, so my name is Kaelie Lund. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm currently a victim assistance specialist at the Jacob Wetterling Resource Center in St. Paul, Minnesota. Jacob Wetterling was an 11-year-old in a small town in Minnesota in 1989 where he was kidnapped, and his family started this foundation and didn't know where he was or what happened to him until 30 years later, when they did find that he had been kidnapped and killed that same day. So the foundation was founded by his family and is now a resource center when we serve families of missing people. My background is in sexual assault, domestic violence advocacy. So I am a St. Olaf College graduate of 2016, and I did Jackie, St. Olaf? Is that real? We'll get to it. This is great. So I went to St. Olaf, and then I jumped ship and crossed the river to Carleton and college in the same town. Yes, okay, where I was an assistant dean of admissions for 4 years and did bystander intervention training, worked with a gender and sexuality center, and then I left actually just in December to this new role. So I had been looking for something in the nonprofit world where I was able to use some of the skills I had been doing advocacy stuff prior, but yeah, admissions. Here I am now doing something totally different, so.
Awesome, thank you, Kaelie. And Jackie.
I'm sorry, I'm from Southeast Minnesota, so I'm like St. Olaf and Carleton, like they are wonderful schools. So that was just really cool, and it makes my Minnesotan heart go pitter patter, and then I suddenly have a craving for hot dish. My name is Jackie. I am the executive director for Saturday Academy, which is a STEM education-focused nonprofit here in Portland, Oregon. I came to nonprofit work very, very recently. So this is like literally my 3rd month on the job, but it was a really fascinating transition from student affairs into the nonprofit sector. And why I wanted to participate on this panel was to talk about what that's like during a COVID pandemic. My student affairs background, I was a faculty member at my university where I was working on data management and then kept on working with the graduate programs over and over and over again. I got my PhD from the institution where I was a faculty member, and that just is because I'm a big nerd and didn't have a date to prom, so a PhD seemed like the thing to do. So after I was serving as a faculty member, I got involved in directing the Career and Professional Development Center, focused on professional development for students, and then I eventually became the Associate Dean for Graduate Student Affairs at OHSU. So it's been a longest journey, but I found that student affairs really did set me up well for being a competitive applicant in the nonprofit universe. So I'm really excited to talk more about that.
Awesome, and I am so excited as well. I did want to let folks know we're supposed to have a 5th panelist. We hope that Amanda will be able to join us. Amanda, if you're here and under a different name and I wasn't sure it was you, please just send me a message and I will give you a co-host power so that you can join our panel. But we'll leave Amanda's photos up and hope that she will be able to join us. But for now, let's get right into it. So just so everyone knows, if you haven't had a chance to be a part of one of these panels already, we are going to leave the mics muted for now so that we can go through a kind of a Q&A, and then you're welcome at any time to put your questions in the chat. I will definitely be following along with the chat and weaving in those questions as I can. If you would like to send a question anonymously, you have 2 options. You can either change the name on your participant list and rename yourself something that no one would know and send it to the entire group, or you can send it semi-anonymously. You can send it to me directly. Note that I will see your name attributed to that, but I will not reveal your name in asking it. And I did confirm that none of the names in the private messages show up in the chat transcript, so you don't have to worry about that. So a few options for you as we get towards the end of the panel, when we open it up for full question and answer. If you would like to be unmuted to ask your question, feel free to just use the raise hand or send a chat and I can unmute you so that you can ask our panelists your questions. All right, let's get going. So to get us started, let's talk a little bit about what you do in your current roles. So what are your responsibilities? What do you need to do to accomplish them? And then what are the transferable skills that you brought with you from student affairs to be able to fulfill those responsibilities? And so Candice, if you don't mind, we'll start with you.
Sure. So that was a lot. So if I leave anything out, just let me know. So I currently serve on the senior leadership team of the Harlem Children's Zone. So the other managing directors and I have a portfolio of programs that span the pipeline of the organization. So we're a cradle to career pipeline service organization that serves 97 city blocks in Harlem. That is the physical Harlem Children's Zone. And we have community programming and wraparound services. So the Center for Higher Education and Career Support, I said I wasn't going to say that again. So CHECS. My portfolio includes college readiness. So all K-12 college readiness throughout the entire organization. The organization serves between 20 and 50,000 people a year. So K-12 readiness for our 2 Promise Academy charter schools and all of our after-school programs. Once our students transition into CHECS, I have a team of about 25 college counselors that have about 60-to-1 ratio, and they directly advise students as they are persisting through 2- and 4-year schools. And then for students that have stopped out at any point, we have a retention caseload, which is counselors that are more adept in trade school programs, career, and things that are for older non-traditional students or students that have just determined they don't want to go to college anymore. Also have a career team that helps our students with career exposures, we run an internal internship program so students can intern within the organization before we funnel them to external competitive internships that will hopefully yield full-time offers. And so that team also does resumes, job search, job shadowing, and anything that our students will need to be ready for a career. We also have an alumni association for all of our students that have finished college. And then we have a social services team. So I have a team of licensed clinical social workers that help our students navigate sort of any of the issues that we all know that students of color are navigating as they navigate the college landscape. So that's what I do on a daily basis. So my job is sort of bifurcated with running the center and then being on the senior leadership team of the overall organization to make sure that everything that we're learning at the end of the pipeline is then funneled back through the entire organization so that we're producing students that are able to be college and career ready. And that includes a number of things that I can get into later. Does that answer the question? Do I need to say anything else?
Yeah, it totally does. Do you want to talk a little bit about any of the transferable skills that you're bringing over?
Okay, so I think that I might be the only person in the organization with a higher education master's degree. In fact, I know I am. And so that is a unique perspective because as an organization, we have espoused this value of we want our students to be college and career ready. And people anecdotally know what that means, but they have never, other than going to college, had the experience of working on a college campus and sort of seeing how students actually develop from a perspective that wasn't their own. And so that's been wildly helpful. All of the connections that I was able to make, I was like an avid ACPA NASPA-er throughout my career. So I have lots of connections when our students have troubles on a campus. Even if I don't know someone directly, I might know someone who does know them. I know how to speak the language when I'm calling a dean or I'm calling a president or I'm calling a financial aid office. We have all of our kids sign FERPA waivers because I know that if I need to get your transcript, I need a FERPA waiver. So all of our kids sign FERPA waivers. I think that I would not be successful in my position had I not spent about 10 years working in higher education. Because I would not know what I know now. And I think that the nonprofit space is like dying for people who have that actual content knowledge to then recycle it back into the work that's being done on the community end to get students college and career ready. So I could not do my job without a higher ed background. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. Kaelie, how about you? A little bit more about your role and the transferable skills that you're bringing into it?
Yeah, it's me, right? Okay, good. So I talked a little bit about the foundation that I work at. So my job as a victim assistance specialist is to primarily serve families of missing people, mostly children. But a typical day, I mean, during the interview process, I actually thought that they were being kind of dodgy because they couldn't tell me what a typical day looks like, but it's true. It changes. So we run a 24/7 hotline. That's nationwide. So one day, like for example, this week I've helped 2 kids who were picked up by some people and attempted to, also content warning, I'm going to talk about just some stuff regarding sexual violence. So 2 teenagers who were picked up and almost trafficked. I worked with a person who was escaping domestic violence and was traveling south. I worked with somebody who had a missing 14-year-old and she was found, which is great. I mean, so like my whole week can look very different. I also am creating a training for a governor's team in Connecticut of nonprofit multidisciplinary team professionals and teaching them about LGBTQIA+ competency, which is something I kind of carved out into the role I have now. So when thinking about just some of the skills that I brought with me from working in higher ed, especially admissions, like I can talk to anybody about anything. Like I can talk to a wall about, I was able to talk to a wall about Carleton College when I worked there. And I use those same skills and presentation skills for when I'm going into schools and leading trainings. I know how to talk to kids about healthy relationships because I know how kids operate. Like I worked with high schoolers for 4 years. And I know how to, navigate calling a high school and scheduling something, right? Like it's just some of those really simple things. But Candice, as you said, I was totally like speaking the language. Yeah, even knowing like which office to call, which button to press on the phone when you're trying to get a hold of someone out of school. And then I would also say just like the familiarity with taking on a project and being empowered to just do it. I think that's something that my supervisors consistently like, oh, like I can just give you something and you get it done. And I think that when I was working in admissions, I was running communications for our entire junior set of applicants. I was, managing campaign platforms. I was working with CRMs. I was tracking and constantly contacting students. So I'm really used to having a lot of irons in the fire and being able to know where they're at all times. Managing 200 student tour guides, right? I don't know. So I feel like being able to have a lot on my plate and knowing exactly where all those things are, that gave me a lot of power to be able to carry that into the job that I'm working now. And also I needed the 40 hours of state certified domestic violence, sexual assault advocacy training, which I had from college. So that was a necessary part of my job. And for people especially interested in working in some sort of advocacy field, I'm happy to talk further about that later.
Great, thank you so much. Jackie, how about you? What about your role and what are you bringing into it?
I'm bringing a wicked sense of humor and also a deep sense of cynicism from student affairs. Anyway, so I'm the executive director, and that means that I have to look at the oversight of the entire organization. And then one of the most important aspects of the job is actually relations with the board and donor relations. So these are two categories that at the surface of it, they seem like they're pretty much as far away from higher ed as you can get because it's like these amorphous people that are way out there. But in fact, I think that it is one of the transferable skills that student affairs really gives you. Going to what Kaelie said, you can talk to people, you can interface with people, you can understand and empathize with their motivations, and then be able to layer that information into the overarching mission of your organization. So that I think is a huge transferable skill that comes from all of those student affairs. The other thing that I do is I am maintaining our staff. So our staff is relatively small, roughly 22 people that are full-time FTE. Then we have 120 instructors, we have 60 mentors, and we have 23 teacher monitors. So overall, the organization does get quite large when you start thinking about the total number of people that report through our org. That ability to manage and understand people and organizations, again, is something that's intrinsically built into higher education. We've been swimming in higher ed for a long time. I'm assuming all of the audience participants have also been swimming in higher ed. So we kind of breathe the politically complex landscape, the idea of silos and silos and silos, but yet you still can break through them to collaborate, but you have to navigate it in this particular way, talk to this person. Those types of things are exactly what you have to do to run a nonprofit. It is identifying who the people are that you need to talk to, trying to bring people together and understand that you can do things in different and innovative ways, and it's going to be just tremendously effective. And one of the things that I love the most about nonprofit work so far is that I can get shit done. And that is at a level that never happened in higher ed because that took forever and a day. But as executive director, somebody once told it to me this way, you say it and it gets manifest. And that whole concept is just amazing and I love it. So the transferable skill that I find the most useful is definitely the ability to interact with people, but the transferable skill that I think is actually going to be fundamentally most useful on the long run is systems thinking. And the ability to layer those systems together with an understanding of how people actually work. That is why student affairs is really freaking hard work, but that's also exactly why you're going to be successful in the nonprofit sector.
Awesome, thanks, Jackie. Tamika, how about you? Tell me more about your role and what transferable skills you're seeing work for you in it.
Awesome. Jackie, your excitement just gave me life because I'll start with the transferable skills. I think nonprofit loves student affairs folks, just as Candice stated as well. I think the major thing that I bring is the confidence. Like, I know what it's like to be at ACPA and having to navigate a room, or I know what it's like to be competitively applying for a job at ACPA or anywhere else. And so those things I bring, like my supervisor, everyone loves it. They love what I do, the creativity. And for me, I'm like, I feel like this is like a little mediocre. And they think it's like really high level stuff because we're taught to like think on your feet, get the idea of getting it done, but also having the space in the room to get it done. So I, as the admissions manager with City of Philadelphia, my role is about 80% remote. I go into the office when I want to. And so that's really great too. But in City Year, we serve in about 350 schools across 29 cities and in 21 states. And we work with math and literacy skills for our students in under-resourced communities. And so I'm hiring basically 185 to 200 AmeriCorps members each year to go into the schools and do that service. So my responsibility from the time they submit an application, I'm scheduling their interviews, I'm coordinating interviews with our site staff, and then I'm also assisting them until they come to service. So that looks like onboarding, that looks like helping folks find housing, a lot of different hats that I wear. Some days I'm a coach, some days I'm just like, yeah, this is great. Like, let's give me your paperwork. I really need this done. So it just depends on the day of what I'm really doing. But those transferable skills, I will say that higher ed taught me how to navigate the nonprofit space. I know how to ask for what I want. I'm probably the most traveled when we could travel. I was probably the most traveled admissions manager because any opportunity I got to travel, I would take it. They've also paid for a lot of my certifications or anything that I wanted to do in a sense because I know how to ask for it. So I remember I was an ACPA ambassador when I was in grad school. And I remember there was a forum for ACPA, it was on their website. It was, this is how you ask for the funds you need to come to ACPA. I used that same form to ask for funds to get some training. And so being able to ask for things, they're not really used to that because a lot of my colleagues, they've done either City Year or another AmeriCorps program, and quite a few of them had just stayed with the organization. And so it's like they kind of got a breath of fresh air and they're venturing out a bit more to find folks with more unique skills. And not to say that my colleagues don't have it, but that higher ed perspective is definitely something there and navigating the space that I have to navigate.
I love it. Great. Thank you so much. Okay. So Kaelie, I'm going to start with you for this next question, but then give everyone a chance to respond. And this is a perfect question for you because it's about this first year on the job. So tell me your first year on the job, which of course you're in right now, what has the learning curve been like? And what were some of the gaps that you identified that did exist and how are you addressing those gaps?
Yeah, so I started December 30th, so right before the new year, and I worked for about 3 months and then have been in quarantine for 3 months. So it's been a very weird first 6 months of this job. Also, I know I'm cutting in and out a little bit, so if you miss anything, just let me know and I can rephrase. So I would say that, just to give some context, so the Jacob Wetterling Resource Center is about 5 people, and we're spoke, and the wheel is the Zero Abuse Project. So it's a national company that took over a bunch of different programs of child abuse prevention, child maltreatment prevention, and victim advocacy. So there's a lot I could go into there, but essentially we're a 5-person office in St. Paul, and then there's like maybe 10 or 15 other people that work nationally across the country. So like our CEO is based in Washington, D.C. My supervisor lives in St. Paul. So the onboarding process for me didn't really exist. I came in and like had to go figure out where my laptop was. Like there was no sort of like warm entree into like, and not to say that I had that a little bit when I started my first job at Carleton. There's definitely like, you are new here, let's get you through the ropes and show you and make sure you know where to go. This was very much just like figure it out on yourself. So I actually, like, because I didn't have a background in missing persons and I had to supplement a lot of that education into the current basis I had of sexual assault, domestic violence advocacy, I created like this 12-page Google Doc of resources that I did in my first 6 weeks. And I have it ready if we ever hire another victim assistance specialist, because I don't want them to have to go through what I had, which is essentially like trying to figure out like which old binder is most accurate. And like, I just threw away all the old binders. Like I just got rid of the old stuff we don't need. Yes, get rid of the binders. And I think, Tamika, what you're saying about like confidence, just like ask for things, take ownership. Like people did not ask for things in my office. I was like, can I get, a headset that actually works and has a microphone? And they were like, I mean, I guess, like, or even just like asking to go to trainings or being able to justify why it would make sense with my new position and being able to kind of put that up. Just that really resonated with me. So I would say that was something that I am currently in process still of learning, but I try to make it better, at least for any new people that would come in after me.
Awesome. That's such a student affairs thing to do, like create it and then pass it on, right?
Yeah. Can I actually add one more thing?
Of course.
So I'll just say for context too, I was, and I'm really transparent, I can answer any other questions off board here too, but I was promised a certain salary and a certain number of hours, and now we're actually across the board, everybody in my nonprofit is getting their everything cut by 20% starting a couple days ago. So just know that like, I don't want to say like don't jump off the boat of higher education, because like I don't know how like safe that boat is right now, but just know that like sometimes things do change, and I didn't expect to be where I am, but I still have a job and I'm still really grateful. So yeah, I guess the last thing I just wanted to say there was like things can change at nonprofits, and it wasn't as stable as my other job, but it's a risk that I'm so glad I took.
Great, thank you. Jackie, this is probably a good question for you too, because you're also in that first year, right? So what has the learning curve been like, and how are you addressing any gaps that exist?
So this is going to sound insane, because I bet that many of you in student affairs and higher ed felt that the infrastructure at your institution sucked and that it was the worst. Oh my God, did we get a paycheck? Because like they screwed up 14 of my transactions just last week, and I try and call 37 people this thing done and it doesn't happen, like infrastructure, right? So nonprofit is very variable. So as I mentioned in my online portion of this thing, I was in the finalist for 3 executive director searches at the same time. So I was learning a lot about 3 different organizations, and the infrastructure was wildly different at each of those organizations. So I had been specifically asking about onboarding, and one of them presented me with a binder full of stuff, and it included all of the reports, links to where they were on their private drive, which I didn't have access to, but it showed that they clearly mapped everything out. And the organization that I actually run now has the worst onboarding and the worst infrastructure that I have ever seen. And so I was trying to find some information about cost model. So I went in there and I just did a search for cost model, and there are 26 folders that have cost model in the title. None of them are in the same file directory. None of them are actually in finance. I mean, it's the Wild West out there. So that is just something to let you know that there could be very extreme variability from nonprofit to nonprofit. They, I think, have a lot more heterogeneity than higher ed. I think higher ed, there's a lot of similarities in terms of the history of the infrastructure, the just the inertia of higher ed is at least a little bit more similar from institution to institution, and then what I've seen of nonprofit is very different. Of my onboarding and drinking from the fire hose, it is absolutely drinking from the fire hose. And unlike higher ed, where it was super easy for me to turn to the person in my office and say, tell me what's going on, or tell my exact counterpart in the other college of the university what's going on, there is not that person in my organization. So this is one of the things about being a director. It's a very lonely position, and I've already figured that out. So I've already started making my own connections, and every single time that I connect with another executive director, they're like, oh my God, I'm so glad that I have someone to talk to. And I'm like, you've been in this job for 15 years and you haven't had someone to talk to in 15 years? That's crazy. So this is one thing to be cognizant of, is that if in the executive director position, there is not that person to necessarily go to for advice as easily as you would like. And that's just something that I found really striking about the onboarding. In terms of what I've done to prepare myself for this, I researched the shit out of everything. So you're going to be using all of those academic research skills that have gotten you where you are in higher education. And I think you will find that the academic mindset for what good evidence is, for what quality information is, and how you can assess the information and ingest it all, that is also a hugely wonderful transferable skill that those in higher ed can really easily transfer into nonprofit land. Those resources, I think, are going to be very heterogeneous based off of location. So in the state of Oregon, we have a wonderful state nonprofit association. Because we're a small state, that actually works out really well for me being able to ingest a lot of information, but it's different from place to place. So the first year has not even been a year, it's been 3 months, it's been a quarter. It's been absolutely insane. And what infrastructure I thought was terrible at higher ed doesn't exist at all in my organization. So just be prepared. And I'm hopeful that the other panelists have more infrastructure that they get to lean on. So please tell me that my experience is totally unique. Did I answer the question?
You did. I don't know about totally unique, but Tamika, City Year is a huge organization, or at least it feels that way. What's your experience? What was your first year like? What gaps did you have?
Sure. So it's definitely different in the infrastructure. I can't tell you that it's better, but we are right now, we're going through a reorg. And so it is when Kaelie said that it can change very quickly. I was just on a call at 4:00 about this reorg and it's going down. So there's that. But my first year, I actually found myself having to pull back. Like I was doing the most. I was like in higher ed, when we grind, like I was doing that and I like burnt myself out because number one, nobody forced me to do it. I was just like, oh, I'll do this presentation, I'll do all these things because that was the energy that I was used to. And so I really had to stop myself. So this second year, I was like, I'm not doing all of that. And so folks have asked and I've said no, and it's been great. And it's allowed me to better like balance my time, but also focus on my actual role. So I think that was the biggest thing for me year one, was saying I don't have to take that same higher ed energy into my work. Because I will say my organization, and when it comes to self-care, when it comes to like just being mindful of, you know, yourself, they're very good at that. Like we got COVID days, we got 14 COVID days. They're giving us more after June is over. People are just taking off because they have the days. And they also understand that there's a lot happening globally. So I will say I'm very fortunate in that. In terms of not having my supervisor here is a bit challenging. My onboarding was very similar. My supervisor is located in North Carolina. He came up for 2 days and then he was gone. And I was in an office with all of these site folks who I didn't know. So I was like doing that like higher ed introductions, I'm Tamika, talk to me. So that was very different and unique. My team, I'm on the East Region team. So I have folks in Boston, DC, Providence, New Hampshire, and all of it is just so remote. And sometimes like going through a reorg right now, honestly, it's very challenging. With my teammates, we're reapplying for jobs, we're competing right now. And it's that weird energy that like, I didn't miss from higher ed. And I was just like, oh no, like, and it's hard also because with my organization, while it's so big, it does feel like a community. It feels like, you know, a connection with folks. They do a lot to try to make sure that we are connected. We have affinity groups, race-based affinity groups, and things like that. And so right now with this reorg, having all of that culture challenged is a lot. Another thing I will say is that the organization, it started with two white heterosexual men. And so the culture of the organization is very conflict avoidant. And that was hard for me to deal with because I'm also a Philly girl. So I'm like, listen, let's just talk it through. We're going to process this. It will be fine. And my degree is also in counseling and higher ed. So that was very hard to navigate, having, you know, such a conflict avoidant team and not being able to address issues as they came up, especially being remote. So it was like all of these double layers that I've been trying to navigate for the last 2 years.
Awesome. Yeah, when you were talking about this reorg and like people reapplying, I was like, oh, that definitely has higher ed vibes to it. But thank you for not saying no to this panel opportunity as you are taking care of yourself. All right, Candice, let's close out with you on this question. What is this question? What was the first year on the job and what gaps did you find that you needed to fill and how did you do so?
Yeah, so this is my second nonprofit job, so I can compare the two experiences. The first organization, I walked in and there was nothing there. It was kind of like an office that I literally found an Encarta encyclopedia, like in a CD in my office. Like I should have kept it as like a relic. Because exactly, like no one had gone through the desks, the file cabinets, like there were lots of archaic things, like they were still keeping paper files. So I had like walls of file cabinets in my office. I was like, we're getting rid of all this crap. Call Blue Mountain to come get this shit. Like I want it out. So there was a lot of like, no one told me. There was a folder on the desk and it had a single sheet of paper. And it was like a calendar of like, these are some of the events that have happened throughout the year. And that was that. But I loved that because, as Tamika said several times, like that higher ed in you, you're like, oh, I got this. Like, I'm going to build, it's better that they did this because I'm going to build it better than they would have told me to do it anyway. So this is perfect. And that was like a perfect experience to like manage up. My supervisor had really no idea what I was doing because I was doing it so well. She was like, just keep doing that. Just do that. And so like you make people's lives easier because you know what you want to do and you know what you want to accomplish. So I think that transition was very much like, I'm going to take these 4 months. I'm going to build out this curriculum. I'm going to build out this program. I only had a team of 2, so it was super easy to manage folks. And I was like, and we're just going to get after this. Transitioning to the Harlem Children's Zone was a completely different animal. There are 2,000 employees. Not all of them are full-time, but there's 2,000 employees. I manage a team of 45 people. And yeah, it's just a completely different ballgame. So there was, but even with that, I'm still the only person in the entire organization that does my job. So it's not like I have colleagues, I have other managing directors that I can reach out to because they have experience within the organization, but specifically within my team and my department, they have no concept and no clue. So there was still some of that, like, let me figure this out. But that transition was a lot different because instead of coming in as the new person who had maybe some subject matter expertise to share and people were just waiting to learn from me, people on day one were like, who is this? What is she doing? What is she about? Why did they hire her? Because the organization very rarely seeks external candidates. So most of the people that have been there my colleagues have been there between 8 and 20 years, right? Like, so people don't leave. And when you come in, everyone's giving you the face, like, prove yourself. Who are you? And don't say the wrong thing. So, or like, it's definitely a place where I've had to find, like, you have to watch what you say because people will misinterpret what you're saying. And especially when you're at a certain level, people will run with the one misquote that you may have made on a bad day. Like, people take very much credence in the things that are coming out of your mouth. So it's been a lesson in, like, knowing where to be myself and knowing where to shut the hell up. But I will say that the organization, there are lots of things that I love about my job, but the thing that I love the most is that I work for an organization that considered putting in our mission statement unapologetically Black, which I really appreciate. Like, we are who we are. I work in an environment that's like 85% people of color. Like, there are white people that work at the Harlem Children's Zone, but predominantly people of color. And so that has colored the transition as well, just being around people that look like me. And having that transition. There's also some of the negative sides of that, though. There's still a little bit of, like, the respectability, like, you should wear a tie, you shouldn't wear a hat, like, some of the things that were done as, like, survival mechanisms that have just lived on as vestiges throughout the organization that now we're trying to dismantle. But there is some of that you have to sort of cater to as well. But for the most part, I think the transition, it depends on, like, what you're transitioning into, like what level in the organization you're transitioning into, and the size of the organization. I think that really matters as well, because transitioning into a large organization has been stressful. Like that water hose thing, Jackie, amen. Like my boss always says, like, you land on the Harlem Children's Zone. Like, it's Mars. Like, there's no place like it. So that's just something to consider when you're thinking about the size and the scope of your role and the organization if you're trying to transition into a nonprofit.
Well, one of the things about the water hose is that there's one stream that's just about the org, and then there's the other stream about, like, what your job is, and then there's this other stream about the context of your org. So it's like, it's not just one, it's coming from all sides.
I think that's great. And like, that really helps me visualize what you're talking about. Cause I've heard this analogy before, right? Drinking through a fire hydrant, a water hose, whatever. But yeah, you have a whole different context to learn in the nonprofit. And even if you've got a background in nonprofit, if you're changing within nonprofits, you might have a whole new context every single time. Whereas transitioning to higher ed institutions, you need to learn, what specific things distinguish your institution, but a lot of it is, plug and play. So Jackie, I'm actually going to let you take this one first, and it's on the topic of how you got where you are. So you talked a little bit about how you were a candidate for 3 different searches, executive director searches, but can you talk a little bit more about where did you look for these jobs? What did you need to do to your resume to make you a viable candidate for these jobs? What were the interview processes like? All that good stuff.
Okay, so the first thing I did was realize that I needed to get out of my job, then mourn the fact that it felt like the only thing I was trained to do was my job. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm useless. Like I can't do nothing. And I'm like, I can help a small portion of the graduate population, maybe do this one thing. And then I cried myself to sleep. And then I realized that I felt this exact same stress when I finished my PhD. I was like, I am worthless. I know everything about one type of collagen. Woohoo. Like that's like not even good cocktail party conversation. So I had been through this before and I had forgotten that I had been through this before. This whole idea of feeling like I was pigeonholed. So then what I did was exactly what I did last time, which was I set out on a year of informational interviews. And even though I knew that the nonprofit sector was where I wanted to go, I still cast a really wide net on those informational interviews. So I talked with coaches, I talked with corporations, I talked with nonprofits, and within a nonprofit, I talked to a lot of different people within that organization, organizational structure. So I talked with people that were executive directors, just frontline personnel, ops, management, like all different types of areas. And that was partially so I could learn and confirm that nonprofit sectors where I wanted to go to, but also so I could start learning the language. Now, in higher ed, we are strong believers of the TLA, the three-letter acronym. Nonprofits the exact same way. They've got their own set of language, and how you leverage that language is going to matter. When I realized that this is where I definitely wanted to go, the first thing I did was take a couple passes at my resume, my LinkedIn profile, identified people that had the jobs that I wanted. Like this person was an executive director of an education nonprofit. Oh my God, I want their job. Let me look at their LinkedIn profile. Let me talk to them and see if I can get a copy of their resume. So based off of doing that iteratively, I developed a better sense of the language that was going to resonate with nonprofit hiring and search firms. The next thing I did was I actually hired a search firm consultant to look at my materials. And I spent, I think it was $150 on this person, which is a lot of money on one hand, but in terms of the insight that that person gave to my resume, it was well worth the expense. So as a person who ran nonprofit director searches, they were able to say, yep, this language works. No, this one doesn't match, is not commensurate with your skill set. And they were able to go through and really tweak everything. Having done a lot of the groundwork ahead of time, that made me much more efficient when working with this person. So I laid a good foundation and then was able to finesse it with the person whose sole job was to help nonprofits find directors. So then having done that, then I started my job search by starting with idealist.org, and then from there finding more and more specific organizations that offered nonprofit executive searches. Because I wanted to stay in a specific geographic area, I reached out to search firms that specifically worked in the Portland metropolitan area and developed a spreadsheet. So I'm a huge believer in spreadsheets because, like I said, didn't have a date to prom, so very nerdy. So I created a tracking spreadsheet. I'm happy. It includes the job, the contact, a web page, when I applied, when I followed up, all those different types of parameters. And it just gave me a nice overview that I could look at every single week when I was doing my job search. For my job search, I was very structured. I had 4 hours set aside every week, 2 on Tuesday, 2 on Thursday, and then additional work on the weekend as needed. So that way I knew I had this time put away. It was on my calendar, do not interrupt. In my calendar appointment, I think it said, dreaming the dream, escaping higher ed or something like that. And no one noticed it like for a while. And I was like, oh man, you guys have no attention to detail. Anyway, so I dedicated specific time, and also I set specific goals. And the big goal was find an executive director position, but then I chunked it down. So my weekly goal consisted of 1 informational interview, 1 application. Then the next week it was follow up on 3 applications, and then link and stock 1 other person. And then as time went on, then it was set aside 90 minutes for interview prep, set aside 30 minutes to just specifically look up questions for this organization. So it was really structured in how I used my time because I was still working full-time in student affairs, which is a 24/7, 365 job. I have a husband, I have a kid, I've got elderly parents. So like, it's just, it wasn't going to happen unless I set time aside for it. So I did a super analytical attentive tracking spreadsheet, but it really helped me keep an eye on the big picture. I had a weekly goal tracking spreadsheet that would help me figure out exactly what I was going to do in those 4 hours. And I was able to go through this whole process and within 3 months get to the 3 ED position interviews. So yeah, that was kind of a bit of that. Yeah, did I answer the questions?
Yeah, I just want to let everyone know that they've just gotten a snippet of Jackie's masterclass on how to get a job as an executive director at a nonprofit. If you don't have plans for that, you need to work on that, because it seems like a very amazing system that obviously was a huge success and all of us could benefit from learning more about. Okay, thank you so much, Jackie. Tamika, what do you got?
I was not that thorough. So that's the first thing I want to say. Props to you. I've just like learned so much.
The rest of us, thank you for that. Something maybe a little bit more manageable for us. So Tamika, tell us about your process. How long did it take? How did you go about it? What did you do with your materials if you didn't have spreadsheets and all that?
Cool. So the only thing I did that was close to that was set an alarm on my phone saying, you need this job, girl, you got student loans, like just to make sure I stayed on track. So that was like that was the extent of it. But I firmly believe in LinkedIn jobs. So that's where I found my job. That's actually where I found my first job out of higher ed as well, which was a dean of students. So when I left Res Life, I knew I was leaving. I'm a first generation college student. That was a whole lot of stress for me to even commit to leaving higher ed with no job. And so when I left, I came back home. I was in upstate New York. I came back home to Philadelphia, and I knew not necessarily that I wanted to be a nonprofit, but that I needed to be in my community. So proud North Philly native. My first job out of higher ed, I was working at a charter school with Black and brown students. Really loved it, but also was a lot to handle. Because of all of the things that our students are experiencing. And right after that, I was like, you know what? I actually don't want to be in the school anymore. Like, let me try to encourage the people who are going into the schools, because I don't want to be there. I also run my own LLC. So I work with Black and brown students all the time. And I wanted to do it from the capacity that I can do it in, from my LLC standpoint and not my 9-to-5. And so I went on LinkedIn. I was on LinkedIn all the time. My material, I do resumes as well, so I was okay with changing my language. And really all I did was look at the job description and make sure the lingo made sense. So taking out a lot of the higher ed jargon and being prepared to explain what I did in some of my roles, because everybody does not know what a residence hall director is. My family still doesn't know. We all just go through that struggle. So that's what I did in terms of navigating like the resume space. And then my interview process, there were 3 interviews, 2 were via phone. And then my third one was in person, because as I said, my supervisor lived in North Carolina, so he had to come up to Philly for the interview. That third interview was very higher ed-like, meeting with multiple people throughout the day, touring the office, things like that. The other 2 were just simply on the phone. But I think that was, I was more so focused on what I wanted to do and not nonprofit. So I really don't know how I got to nonprofit, but I will say that I like it. So just thinking about like the things that I was missing from higher ed and wanting to make up for that and be very much so a part of my community and in my community. And so that's really how I ended up with City Year.
Awesome. I think that that's great. And identifying like, you know, nonprofit, for-profit, whatever, you knew what you wanted and that drove your search. So that's awesome. So Candice, are you more on the, I ran data analysis on my project, or you need this job, girl?
Slacker friend. So pull up. If you're with me, listen. Okay, so my first job, like I said, I was tired of the tears and I like went on LinkedIn. So second plug for LinkedIn. I just happened to go on LinkedIn. I don't know what I searched for. Maybe it searched for me. You know how the analytics work. And it just popped up and I saw it. I applied. I had a phone interview. The person interviewing me had ended up, she went to Georgetown. I worked at Georgetown. We spent 45 minutes talking about Georgetown. I came in for an interview and had the job within 2 weeks. It was really that simple. And so I will say, like, that was something to get used to, because I've been in higher ed processes, baby, that will last for 8 months, and then you'll get an email like, we don't like you. You're like, but I just dedicated 8 months of my life to this search. What do you mean you don't like me? So that was my first search. When I'm done talking, I'll put in some websites that I'm plugged into. So there's, specifically if you're interested in education, so there's the National College Access Network, the National Partnership for Education Access. They're two sort of like catch-all nonprofit groups. They're sort of like the ACP and NASPA of some of the education nonprofit spaces. And they always have job boards that you can sign up for, and they'll email you sort of a digest. The other thing is, if you're interested, there's a lot of other angles that people don't consider. Like, I also registered with Carney Sando, which is a headhunting firm that does independent schools. They do private schools, boarding schools, independent schools. And so if you're interested in being like a college counselor or a diversity specialist or something within the independent school space, that's a great, they do hiring conferences just like Placement Exchange, for you to go and look for jobs. And then you create a profile and they'll contact you for different positions. So I got several interviews for that. So when I was deciding to leave the position that I was in for 5 years, I did a much longer search, was just trying to figure out what was out there. So I was interviewing some with charter school networks are another great place to look if you want to do sort of higher ed-esque work, just not in higher ed. And then my job now was by word of mouth. So the position wasn't even listed. Someone that I'd worked with previously knew my supervisor and was sort of like, do you think she'd be a good fit? So I didn't even know I was on an interview. So that's the other thing, like, maybe y'all are more savvy than me, but he contacted me and he was like, hey, Leslie, the person that connected, Leslie said that, you have some insight into this area. I'm thinking about revamping my program. Would you mind taking a meeting? I was like, sure, no problem, whatever. And then like halfway through, I was talking about how much money I wanted. So I had no idea, right? So there are sometimes like things just happen. And so you have to sort of be open to the universe as well. So yeah, I'll put them in the chat box, those organizations that I was just talking about. And also I'm hiring. So if any of you want to work at the Harlem Children's Zone, I have vacancies on my team, please come work for me. Okay, bye.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry.
Can I just add one thing about like the whole word of mouth thing? So as soon as I figured out what kind of nonprofit I wanted to work for, I told everybody. I put it on Facebook, I put it on Instagram, and honestly, that's how a lot of jobs were sent to me, was because I let people know that I wanted to move into this space. And it was really vulnerable for me because I had no idea if I'd be successful or not, but it was just telling people and letting them know and letting your own network help you along was tremendously helpful.
Awesome. Okay, Kaelie, question for you is how you got here and what recommendations you have, what your search was. I'm going to, we're nearing the end of our panel. So as Kaelie, you're answering, I'm going to give the others the next question, which is going to be rapid fire, which is the very student affairs, highs and lows, happy crappies, rosebuds and thorns, like very best part of your job, worst part of your job. And so we'll do that next. I want to give you a chance. Kaelie, take it away.
I'm just chuckling at the happy crappy. It's very funny. Okay, so I knew that at some point I wanted to leave admissions. I really enjoyed a lot of aspects of my job, especially getting to recruit like some first generation students out of Houston in our posse program. So like for me, I couldn't imagine leaving the students, but like I would leave them at some point because they would graduate, right? Like that's kind of how I justified being able to leave. And I had just kind of randomly looked at the Minnesota Nonprofit Job Board, which is the resource I used to find my current position. And I knew what type of salary I wanted, and I wasn't going to compromise for that. And that's like, if you know what salary you want, don't compromise for it. Like, don't look under that if you're not going to be able to make a living and live the life that you want to. So I just want to empower everybody to do that as well. I think that really helped me feel like I was worth that and I could find something. Not always maybe the position that you want, but there are things out there. So I was looking and I found this one position and it was like the last day and it was my birthday. So I was just like trying to get it all in. It was like October and, it kind of like I wasn't job searching actively. It was a very passive search because I was just trying to see what kind of stuff was out there in the nonprofit advocacy communications type role that I wanted. So I found it quickly drafted my materials. I had previously applied for other jobs in nonprofit and in admissions, so I had more of a nonprofit language resume ready. And I also like actively worked with students at Carleton, so I was constantly looking at people's resumes and cover letters and editing them. So I just have a lot of skills there in general. So I quickly put together materials, sent it, and I mean, the person who was my current director, my supervisor, also went to St. Olaf, was also the co-chair of the Sexual Assault Resource Network when she was at St. Olaf. So like there's some similarities that she told me were just like, it happened to be kind of a networking thing where I never met her, but because we had some similar backgrounds, like I think my application caught her eye. So I was able to get a phone interview. And then, you know, I forget who brought this up before, but like within 2 weeks I had the job. It was just so much faster than anything I had seen before. And I think part of that was that my position is grant funded. So they needed somebody to be able to come in quickly and get the grant hours needed. So, you know, my current position is more grant hours than it will be in the future because they needed to make up for some of the time where they didn't have somebody doing that. Which is not something I'm used to having to think about, and also not used to having to put in a pay, like in the time card, exactly what I'm doing and how it pertains to my grant hours, which is like not my favorite thing in the world, but super important, so I understand. Yeah, can I answer the happy crappy? Is that okay? Just going into that. And I'll put the resource, the Minnesota Nonprofit Job Board, in the chat as well. I think happiest thing is that I really got to create this like 2-hour presentation to train other nonprofit professionals on LGBTQI+ competency. That's something I completely like created. I said that there's a need for this. I want to make it happen, and I created it. And now I'm working on an 8-hour all day training for people that they're going to sign up. And like being able to say to my supervisor and our CEO, look, you hired me. This is under our mission, so it's not mission creep, but I'm getting to still show how I'm valuable and people are booking me for this presentation. Like, woo, like that's great. Like, yeah, you're still cutting my pay, but I'm getting to do this cool thing I really care about. And I'd say the crappy part is that like, I don't know, I don't get good news sometimes when people go missing and don't come back. So like that is a whole other self-care part of my job that I have to really work on. Like if you are ever in advocacy direct client services, get a therapist. It's just non-negotiable. Get a therapist and have your network of people so you're not always relying on your partner or your roommate. If you live with a partner or roommate, that you have other people you can reach out to when you have a crappy day. So.
Awesome, thank you. Tamika, what are your happies and crappies?
I would say for me, the happy is the sense of care that we get. I talked about it a little bit before, but I do think that my organization cares. And that's something that I didn't always feel in higher ed. And so that's probably like the happiest is like the fact that they care. And I also get to talk to people in different time zones. Like I have colleagues in LA. I have colleagues all over, it feels like. We have a site in South Africa, and it's very exciting when we get to connect. Excuse the noise, my neighbor plays a whole lot of music sometimes. And so I would say the crappy is the hierarchy. I have not left the hierarchy. They love titles, they love, like I have folks who, when they want me to do a project, they talk to my supervisor first. And I think that is silly. I'm like, I am an adult, talk to me. I can tell you if I want to do it or not. But again, that like real conflict avoidant behavior is very problematic for me. Something that I often have to kind of grapple with is as a Black woman and as a person who's from Philadelphia, the work that we do in our community, we don't always get it right. And so trying to mitigate that and be mindful and thinking about the fact that I was one of those little Black kids in the school that we work in. We actually work in my old elementary school. So that kind of have to personally deal with that at times because even, you know, white supremacy culture within my organization. And so trying to be very mindful of that, but then also being a part of the solution for it. That can sometimes be draining, but going back to, you know, I get to take off. I'm off the next 2 days. I'm off next week, you know. I get that flexibility. So I really do appreciate that. And no one's saying, Tamika, you're off. Make sure you get all of these things done before you're off. It's like, you're off, you're off. It's okay. You know, we're not doctors. It's going to be fine. The admissions process is still going to work without you. So that really feels good. And it allows me to take care of myself better.
Great, thank you so much, Tamika. Candice.
What's the crappy? The crappy is there's a lot of pressure, right? I think in higher ed, I felt pressure, but not really, because I was a hall director and I was like, there's like 17 layers of people above me. If something goes wrong, whatever. But I think like when people are looking at you and they're like, Candice, what's the answer? And you're like, that can sometimes feel like crappy a little, but not in a bad way. Just you have to make sure that on a daily basis, you know exactly what you're talking about. I guess some of like the hierarchy and all of that is but I feel like that's everywhere. I don't know anybody that has a job that doesn't have some sort of, I mean, even I'm sure Jackie as like an executive director, I'm sure you're still like the hierarchy because you have to deal with the board, and I'm sure they have their own opinions about things. So I think that's going to be everywhere. The happy is I go to work happy every single day. I love my job. I love my students. I love my team. My CEO like gets on leadership calls every morning and tells us all she loves us. Like I never had a college president tell me that they loved me and that they valued me and that they appreciated me. And like even today, she and I were on the same Zoom call and my son was acting up and she was emailing me like, he's not cute. Like college presidents would never do that. Another happy, and I don't know if people are going to have a chance to ask questions, but y'all should ask honest questions. Another happy for me is the money. Like I get paid way more in a nonprofit than I ever would on a college campus. And I enjoy paying my bills. That's happy for me. So definitely feeling valued in my bank account and in the words and in the expression are definitely happy for me.
That's awesome. And actually that was a question that came in is and I want to make sure that everyone has the ability to share this with the level that they're comfortable doing so. If you could speak, and maybe those of you who are in the higher position, you might have more knowledge about this. What does the range of salary? If someone's coming in entry level, what are they maybe going to be making in your organization versus on the higher level, again, to the extent that you're willing to share? And Candice, since you just shared, if you're willing.
Yeah, absolutely. So my college counselors come in at between $60,000 and $65,000, depending on if they have a master's degree or not. And then that goes up. So like, I think my director this year, she'll make $95,000 to $100,000. So those are like the folks on my team. And then the other thing that I experience, and I don't know if any other nonprofit experiences this, is my organization gives bonuses. So if you are director and above, you qualify for a bonus. And so like, so then the bonus structure is interesting. So like, let's say this year I get a $10,000 bonus. I'll get my $10,000, which is taxed 50%, but we won't get into that. So I'll get my $10,000 bonus, and then they'll take 150% of that and invest it for 5 years. So at the 6-year mark, I'll start getting 2 bonuses a year. So I'll get the performance bonus in August, and then I'll get the payout for my dividend in January, and then I'll get my salary. My organization also pays for 100% of our benefits for me and my whole family, which was a unique thing about nonprofits. My other organization did that, but they didn't do it for my family, but this organization does. So that's rare. So that's why I would say, like, if you're gonna work in a nonprofit, like I'm gonna put it in the box, go to guidestar.org. And this website will it'll show you the balance sheets of every single nonprofit organization. It'll tell you how much the CEO is making, the top maybe 10 or 15 folks in the organization are making. So when you're going in and they're trying to lowball you, you're like, no, try again. The last person made this. Maybe they were there for 5 years. So like, I want, $10,000 less than that. But I will say, like, I left higher ed and I got a $20,000 bonus, $20,000 bump. And then between organizations, I got like a $50,000 bump. So like, don't let anybody tell you nonprofits aren't paying, because they are, right? You just have to do your research and look at those balance sheets and figure out like who's paying what. Look and see where their money is coming from. Because I know like COVID has hit a lot of organizations really hard. So look at like the endowments, look at how they're investing their money to make sure that that organization is interested in being sustainable for a long time. But don't let anybody tell you can't get paid in a nonprofit, because that's not true.
Thank you for those facts. Kaelie, are you willing to share anything about benefits? And a question that came up actually in the last panel that I think is nice to fold in here too is what you think of what you're being paid and the benefits in comparison to the level of work is it reasonable? Do you feel like it's appropriate?
Yeah, so I'll say in general, most direct advocacy roles pay crap, like very low. And that's because I think a lot of and this is a broad generalization, but from what I've seen in direct service work like that, it just is not as highly valued as administrator work or, other higher positions. And that's something that I've seen a lot in the domestic violence shelters that I worked at and applied for. It was just not even comparable to the jobs I had in higher ed. So for my current role as a victim assistance specialist with this really small nonprofit, the range was 50 to 57,000. And I was able to negotiate all the way up to that. And of course, now it's very different than what getting a 20% cut of that is a bummer, but it's something I'm really, happy to talk about because we should be talking about salaries. So I think that I have no idea what anybody else in my org is making, one, because I'm new, and two, because when I have asked, people are super uncomfortable. And I'm not asking like point blank in the middle, I'm asking with context and sharing my own salary, and still people are not willing to share with me. So I don't have a lot of other information, but I know that when you do find something that's more of a foundation, that's more of a, a mixture of local and national resources, it's typically going to be a higher salary than something that's just really small and local. But of course that can depend based on endowment, based on who the board is and how involved they are with fundraising, based on if they have a fundraising team, period. Yeah, I could say a lot more about that, but, and I would say based on like the other question you asked, which is like, is it a fair compensation? I would say it is, but, they're not paying for my therapist either. So I would say, depending on what you're able to do and how badly you want to do direct nonprofit service work, it really depends on the range. Or there's going to be a pretty big range in compensation depending on what level you're looking at. So yeah, also geography and cost of living, that's super real.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Tamika, I don't know if you want to share anything about your thoughts on the compensation structure available in your organization or how it relates to what's asked of you and what you're given.
Yeah, so I think it's definitely fair. I did come in when I'm newer in my career, so I will say that. Like, I'm a few years out of grad school, so I came in at 50, and it was they encouraged me to negotiate, which it was really weird. But my supervisor's like, "This is what we can pay you. Just tell me you want more," kind of thing. It was a very interesting situation. But I'll also say that for the work that I'm doing, I feel like it definitely adds up. If you look at the 990s, you see who's really making the money. So that's a bit different. But I think when I was a residence hall director, I was only making like 34. And so that's a huge jump and shift for me. And we are just now, I think, starting this fiscal year, going to pay people by locations. So we got folks in Little Rock, Arkansas, who could be making the same amount as me. And granted, Philly's not expensive, but my Boston colleagues, that's not going to help them when it comes to rent and things like that. So we're just starting that this year, which that's something to be very, very mindful of. I will say is, are they going to pay you based on location? But for me, it works out. I'm pretty young in my career. And then the job that I will be applying for is 60. It's going to be a bump of 10K if I get it. So that's just kind of how that variation works here.
Thank you so much for that, Tamika. Jackie, what's your experience with that? Oh, you were muted here.
Get that job and like kill it. So I am, of the 3 ED jobs I was looking at, I took the one that had the lowest salary, and that's because it was geographically in my town that I'm currently at, and that was really attractive to me. So that's 105. And then the 2 that I was looking at, one was 140 and then one was 160. Now the 160 involved a ton of travel. So it was all over the place all the time. And I just didn't feel comfortable with that amount of travel given the fact I have a young kid. So I wanted to be more proximal to home. And also my skill set didn't align as well with that job as the one that I currently have. So I took the 105. In terms of the pay structure within my organization, my directors are between 65 and 80 right now. And then our hourly personnel at $33 an hour. So that is kind of where we're at. We mentioned 990s, for those of you who do not know what those are the mandatory tax filings for nonprofit organization. And they contain all sorts of wonderful information, not only the salaries for individuals that make above a certain amount, at the very least the salary of the CEO or the executive director. They also give you really great information about the financial situation, both nonprofit unrestricted funds as well as restricted funds. They'll also go through by programmatic and tell you by which programs are going to be doing the most return on investment. So you can get an idea of stability and an idea of where the funds flow are. And it's just a really, really useful document. So diving into a 990, it's incredibly boring looking, but you can find out a lot of really interesting information when you're willing to wade through all of the IRS language.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone. We are at about 4 minutes till 7, and I know Candice has to jump off for class, so I want to make sure that we have a chance to thank Candice before she takes off. So let's go ahead and thank everyone for all of this incredible information. You all did such an amazing job, and I'm not saying any questions, that must mean that you got it all. I also want the entire Zoom room to put good energy into the world for Tamika to get that new role that I'm sure she's going to do so well, and then we'll celebrate her also for that. So awesome. If you haven't seen on the slide, there is a bit.ly link there. Bit.ly means it's case sensitive, so make sure that you use the exact case there. But all of our panelists has their information there. So if you want to reach out to individual panelists and ask follow-up questions, they've all indicated that they are open to that. So thank you so much. I'm just looking to see any last thoughts or comments from our panelists that you'd like to share that we didn't get to question-wise.
Just do it.
Right? Make the leap. If you need anything, we all left our email addresses, so email us all. Like I said, I am hiring. So if you're interested in moving to New York City or want to see stuff, job materials, whatever, I don't know, I'm happy to show you whatever. I'm a pretty transparent person. So yeah, definitely feel free to continue the conversation.
Awesome.
I will say this Facebook group gave me hope when I was so down in the dumps with my job when I worked in higher ed. So just, I don't know. Yeah, you can do it. You can make the jump. Everything that they've already said.
For sure. I don't know if many people are active on LinkedIn. You know, it's like another odd social network, but I have found it to be incredible, and I really like it. And especially recently, you can see really organizations that are speaking and how they're speaking about how they're addressing inequities in their organizations. Is it just talk? You know, like there have been calls for like post pictures of your boards. Like, what are you specifically doing? And I think it's a really good way to kind of vet some of these organizations and see if it's a good fit for you, because I think a lot of us can say like fit is so crucial. Especially if you're committing so much of you. I did see a question come in. If you have time, panelists, and are willing to take it, it asks a little bit more specifically about your work-life balance. So do you see, you know, anyone want to, and I'll just leave it open to anyone who wants to jump in, could you speak about like, do you feel like you have better work-life balance, worse work-life balance? Do you want to comment on that at all?
Since I do have to leave, I have to go to class. So that is part of my work-life balance. I have a 2-year-old, I'm in a doctoral program, and I work 50 to 70 hours a week. But I still feel like I have a work-life balance. So when my son is sick, like everyone knows, like that's my priority. Like I will get up from a meeting, I don't care who is in the room, and I'm going to get my kid. And no one ever questions me about that. And I feel like in higher ed, people were like, well, where are you going? These kids need you too. And it's like, I didn't birth those, I birthed this one. So I think like people are super into family. People are very understanding. People ask about your family in like a genuine kind of way. If people see you struggling, they're like, please go home and don't come back until you feel better. So yeah, I mean, I do work a lot because I have a lot of moving parts. There's a lot happening, but I'm not on call per se. Like there's a emergency line, like if people need something, but it's never rang in a year, knock on wood, please don't start ringing. Not in the way that I was in res life. So I definitely have a work-life balance. Like when I take vacation, nobody bothers me, nobody calls me, people leave me alone. All of the things that I didn't experience in higher ed, it was like, you're just working from a different place, but you're still working. When I leave work, I'm gone. So yeah, I definitely have a great work-life balance.
Awesome. And thank you, Candice.
I would say mine depends on the week. I would say if I have a lot of missing persons cases that come in, which isn't super common, usually it's more balanced out. This week would just happen to be a lot of cases. I would say I'm usually able to leave my work at 5 though, which I didn't necessarily expect in this particular capacity, but I think it surprised me a little bit. And I, also have a supervisor that models, like she doesn't have email on her phone, which to me is like, what? You don't have your work email on your phone? I know, right? Yes, but it's possible. And actually hearing that from her was super helpful for me. Like I'm not getting emails from people at 11 o'clock at night. I'm not, I'm not getting emails from people on the weekend. So I've had that modeled behavior and that feels like I can safely, do that as well. But yeah, depends on the week. Sometimes I'm thinking about those kids though, way like past 5 o'clock. And that I think is also just the nature of what I do. So
I would say I definitely have very clear lines of work-life balance. Also because I'm remote, I can work from anywhere. So my supervisor, no one typically has an issue. As long as I'm online. And so I'm able to, if I'm leaving early and I know I'm going to be working late, my supervisor's like, okay, whatever, don't charge the time. You're going to make it up. It's fine. So we are pretty clear about our boundaries here. Again, as Candice was saying, like if someone's seeing you struggling, they're going to say, take time off. This work can be done, like in other ways. Our organization is pretty white. And so a lot of my colleagues have said like, hey, I'll do some app reviews for you. I'll do this if you need time with everything else that's going on. And so I definitely, for folks like in the job search process, ask people about that, what that looks like and what that requirement is, because for me, it's absolutely different than higher ed.
Thanks, Tamika.
I guess from my end, I'm still in the fire hose stage, and to be honest, I'm not sure I see that letting up because like right now I'm in a budget crisis and there's just a lot of moving parts, and then as soon as that's over, then I have to get ready for my audit, and then as soon as that's over, there's always, I can see this being a very long tunnel. So I won't say that I am not working a lot of hours because I am, and I also can't say for sure because we're still in the COVID, like working from home, this is just a completely different time. But one thing that I can say is very similar to what the other panelists have mentioned, which is that when you're not working, you're not working. And Kaelie, I actually was the confidential advocate for my university for a really long time. And so there was always this, like the cell phone, and the cell phone, when it would ring not only because there was an emergency, but because it was a really terrible emergency. And that is something that, that anxiety just builds up night after night because you're like, something terrible is going to happen and then you're going to have to deal with it. So I am working a lot of hours, but one of the things that I found really hilarious was that my staff said, yeah, please don't send us emails on the weekend because like we know you're working, but we're not. And I'm like, oh, hey, cool. So I love that my staff can just take that time, and that is something that I need to gift myself, I guess. Burnout is a problem in nonprofit land. So every single executive director I've talked to, every single nonprofit person I've talked to has mentioned that burnout is an issue. But I think so far it's different than in student affairs. In student affairs, the burnout was external. It was external pressures, external people requesting the moon from you 60 times over, not only having the hierarchy people asking for everything, but also the students asking for everything. So it was like pressure from external all sides. In nonprofit land, from what I've seen so far, it is an internal pressure because you want to do well, you want to have the mission succeed, and you want to do the best by your clients, whether they are missing people's families or whether they are students that I'm trying to educate in my nonprofit. You want to do the best, and so there's going to be a lot of pressure that you're putting on yourself, and I think it's a different type of burnout, but something to be aware of.
Great. Thank you all so much. So I think that I haven't seen any more questions come up, so you all must have just killed it and answered everything they have, or they're waiting to grab those email addresses and ask you in a one-on-one basis. But thank you for joining us. So that wraps up day one of this crazy I Have an Idea initiative, and tomorrow we have our diversity and inclusion panel in the evening, and then Friday we've got 3 more, and then a bunch more next week as well. So I hope to see many of you there. These will be recorded, they'll be posted, in each panel has its own Facebook event, so I'll put the link there, as well as that bit.ly opens to one document for each panel, and I'll have the recording for each one there as well when I can get a chance to get those up. So thank you, panelists. Thank you, attendees. Can't wait to spend more time with y'all over the next 2 weeks.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.